everyone, I think, who is interested in this field should know something about Göbekli Tepe. It's the site that was, I mean, it was originally discovered in the 1950s, I think. There were some farmers, or they saw the tops of what it turned out to be these big T-pillars sticking out of the ground on this side of a hill. I think it translates to pot-bellied hill in that language. And they sort of dismissed it as being, they thought, well, no, this is a relatively modern cemetery or something. Like it's not a, it's not, the stonework was too good to be considered very ancient. And it wasn't until the mid-1990s when the German Archaeological Institute and Klaus Schmidt, who sadly has passed away since then, began to excavate at Göbekli Tepe. And that's when they found, okay, yeah, so this is actually tremendously ancient. It does have some very unique stonework, including megalithic work. You've got, T-pillars that are 18 feet tall and 20 plus tons. And it's a very large site. It's all of these stone circles, these pillars that are encompassed by more of a loose or rough stone walls. And it spreads out. It's quite large. There's a number of them. They've only excavated maybe 10% of that site. And it shook the world up because they based on some of the material that they found in that dig, they pretty much conclusively dated that thing to about 11,000 years old, which is much older than any previously recorded, evidence of civilization or of this type of occupation. So going there was a really interesting experience. People have said for a long time that it was deliberately buried. The work and the research and the science on this is slowly changing. They're starting to move away from this idea that it was deliberately buried. It may just have been layers of sediment that have built up over time. There might have been some periods of burying. In fact, if you tried to bury it deliberately, it would have taken years and years and years. It's a huge site. But what was interesting to me, researching this site, is that if you look at the picture of it, this is a good picture of it. I have some photos too, but this works. Is that you have two styles of architecture here. You have the megalithic work, the T-pillars, and it's not just the pillars here. They would actually cut down to the bedrock. You see that area around the T-pillars. It's when you go there, it looks like cement. It's not cement. It's actually I believe, limestone bedrock that they've lapped down to be flat. So you have these huge, big flat areas, and they inset these stones into them, or some of them are set up on pedestals like that central one. And these T-pillars are, a lot of them, they're not all complete. They're some of them are broken. They have the most amazing high relief artwork on them. By that, it means you're carving away the negative space to make the figures and the symbols pop out at you. Like
right.
Yeah, and and that's a good example of that image there of that one stone. Yeah, if you look at that, so you see how the walls around it kind of encompass those stones. Mm-hmm. Like they actually cover up some of the features, and you can clearly tell the walls seem like they've been built to reinforce these stone circles, to sort of preserve them almost. And looking at the walls, and this is also true at another site we'll talk about, Karahan Tepe, inside the walls, there's actually pieces of broken pillars have been used as material in the building of the walls. And the material, or the organic matter that they've used to date the site to give it that 11,000-year-old age, came from inside these walls. So it's like, to me, I look at that, it's two different architectural styles. I think it is a potentially indicative of two entirely different periods of occupation and building, because these walls are quite primitive. It's local stone, and they're actually using pieces of broken pillars, which means that those pillars could have been there for who knows how long, actually fallen over. Some of them might have broken, and they've been encompassed and used in these walls that were then used to sort of resurrect or renew or renovate the site and protect these pillars. So do we know if it's 11,000-year-old? I think that's kind of the earliest date for it. It's the youngest date. It could be vastly older than that. We really don't know.
And you said there's a bunch of this that's still under the ground?
Heaps of it, yeah. So they've kind of excavated on one side of a hill, and that's where the UNESCO, like the World Heritage Site, is now. Mm-hmm. They've put a big cover over the top of it. It's actually great. Like, yeah, see the walkway there? There's this big. They want to keep the rain off it. I think when it does rain, if they left it out in the weather, it'd just get really muddy, and it'd just wash away a lot of the sediment. It's a great way to view the site. It'd be lovely to get down in there, but they get a lot of traffic. Like, this has become a major tourist attraction for that part of Turkey now. A lot of people want to see this, and they've built a big visitor center, and Yeah, so it's a nice way to view the site. And if you have a camera with a zoom lens, you can kind of see a lot of the detail.
Oh, wow, that's incredible, that negative relief.
Yeah, the high relief. And there's, lots of interesting studies that have been done on Göbekli Tepe. Martin Sweatman, who I've talked about, he was presenting at the Cosmic Summit recently as well. I've talked with him on my channel. He wrote a book called Prehistory Decoded, and he contends that Göbekli Tepe is something of a celestial calendar. He uses a method of statistical analysis that shows that it's extremely likely that's what it is. He's looking at the figures relating to precession and constellations in the sky, and that it when looked at through his analysis, it seems to mark interesting events that we know sort of happened, like periods like the Younger Dryas, because this site dates back to the Younger Dryas. And had there been this comet or these impacts or these fragments of things coming from the sky, that's probably something they would have noticed. He wrote a whole book on this. It's a very interesting theory. He gets attacked pretty hard on the basis of it, I think, from a lot of people that don't really understand the nature of statistics and how that works. He actually wrote there's a peer-reviewed paper that you can read if you're interested in kind of diving into his research or his detail. There's other studies that have been done also that are interesting on the geometry of the site. So there's not only do you have you have these stone circles, which the circles themselves, and this is true also at Karahan Tepe, have interesting alignment. So they align to, a lot of them may well have been used as solar observatories or potentially lunar observatories. So there's alignments on the site that point to significant periods like solstices, equinoxes, lunar events. But there's actually a geometric arrangement between the circles themselves at Göbekli Tepe. So they form like equilateral triangles, I think. There's been some studies done that shows that there was a very deliberate layout planned of how these stone circles were formed. So it was fascinating. And not, so Göbekli Tepe was obviously a highlight, but what I didn't know on this trip was the fact that, okay, I knew about Karahan Tepe, so that's another site that's nearby. It's actually pretty close. There was a site that was very recently discovered. It's an active archaeological site now. I believe the University of Istanbul is excavating there. It's another stone circle site. It's similar architecture to Göbekli Tepe. You have huge T-pillars, but it's something like 10 times larger than Göbekli Tepe. And they've only just sort of scratched the surface at Karahan. They're still digging, and we had special permission to go in there and look around the site. And you can literally look at these beautiful hills with flowers on them, and just poking up everywhere are the tops of T-pillars. You just see this tiny little top of it, and you can clearly see it's a T-pillar, and there's something buried under here. And there might be as many as 1,000 T-pillars on this site. It's at least 5 times or more, I think, larger than Göbekli Tepe, and it's at least 500 years older based on the dating of material that they found so far. Which, it's kind of funny because when they built the visitor center at Göbekli Tepe, they called it like the 0 point in history. This was the brand name that it gave you. You go in, there's big light shows and these big wall-to-wall sort of cinematic experiences to look at the site. But it's like, well, I guess that makes Karahan Tepe 0 point minus 500 or something like this.
Wow.
Right? It's even older. And I actually was out there like 3-4 times during the 2 weeks. It's a wonderful site. I could probably even pull up images if we want to see them. But it's, they're just starting to excavate. And you see a similar thing. In fact, at Karahan, there's evidence of domiciles. So one of the controversies about Göbekli Tepe is this civilization, right? Because technically, if you go look at, and I guess this is more along the orthodox line of thinking, the date for civilization hasn't really changed. We're still saying, well, 6,000 years ago, Sumerians and Mesopotamia, that was the start. But when I look at a place like Göbekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe, that screams civilization to me. The theory is, it's purely ceremonial. It was what happened, and this sort of came out with the Michael Shermer, Graham Hancock, and Randall Carlson podcast on JRE. It's a well-known one. I mean, they've essentially just changed the definition of hunter-gatherers to now not just be, well, no, this is not just, we're not just out hunter and gathering, but on the weekends, I guess, when the men want to get away from the women and the kids or something, they like to, participate in a little bit of megalithic stone building and things like this, and, building these 20-ton T-pillars. It's insane. But there's infrastructure on these sites. They're massive. There's cisterns. There's quarries. There are other structures at Karahan Tepe. There's actually evidence for domiciles and permanent housing, which is another indication of sort of settlement and civilization. And I just look at the scale and scope of what is on these sites, and it's like that's not something you do on the side. Like this requires specialization, right? So for people to be able to specialize in doing this type of stonework, this type of a logistical endeavor, the artwork that's required to carve these things, you need to have infrastructure around you. That means there's other people collecting food, there's other people doing things. Like, it's that organization that essentially defines civilization. I think just the scale and scope of the work requires that. So I think it's kind of ridiculous that we don't consider this civilization. And the nail in the coffin for me, and this is something I learned on that trip, is that it's not only is there Karahan and Göbekli Tepe, but there's between 40 and 80 more sites that they've discovered just like that.
Around that area?
Around that area in southeastern Turkey, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of other well-known sites, Sogmatar and other places, but these tepes and these T-pillared stone circles, they're doing a lot of ground-penetrating radar and that type of thing, and they've discovered somewhere between 40 and 80, and I think they want to open up like 15 of them for tourism. And that's like, at that point, it's a huge civilization. It requires a big population of people, and it's civilization. I mean, it's like a lost chapter of human civilization that we really know nothing about. Like, we've got some artifacts and we've got some indication, but it's to me, it's just a whole lost chapter of our history in this region.
Again, I've taken a look at the kind of attacks that have taken place around my references to Atlantis. And those attacks, they always seek to isolate Atlantis and make us think that that's just the only story that there is about a lost civilization of prehistory. Whereas, in fact, ancient cultures all around the world preserve the memory of a high civilization of prehistory. In India, it was called Kumari Kandam. But if you go to Mesopotamia, you're going to find the same story of a great flood and survivors of a flood who taught knowledge around the world. You're going to find the same story in ancient Egypt. You're going to find the same story everywhere. As a matter of fact, the Atlantis story is present in ancient Egypt. They just don't call it Atlantis. They use a different word for it in the ancient Egyptian language. Atlantis is not an ancient Egyptian word. But that's not surprising if we consider the pedigree of the Atlantis story. The Atlantis story, as it's come down to us, the earliest surviving reference to it is in the works of Plato,
right?
Who is a revered figure in his own right, the Greek philosopher Plato, and in his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. And Plato draws his information from an individual who may well have been an ancestor of his, Solon, the great Greek lawmaker. Solon was famous for his codification of laws in Greece, and he was a traveler, and he made a well-documented visit to Egypt around about the year, in our calendar, 600 BC, okay? And in that visit to Egypt, as Plato reports the story, as he had received it, as he reports it in these dialogues, where he puts the words into the mouths of two people who are talking, Solon was told by the priests of the Temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta, a temple that no longer exists. He pointed to writings on the walls, and there was a priest who spoke Greek and ancient Egyptian, and he asked that priest to tell him, what do these writings say? And the priest then repeated the story of Atlantis, and Plato put that into the Greek language as Atlantis. We don't know what the ancient Egyptians called it there, but I do know that they called it the homeland of the primeval ones from another temple. Solon then asks the priests, so this Atlantis was destroyed in an enormous flood. When did that happen? And they said, quite matter-of-factly, 9,000 years ago. So there you need to do the math. This is 600 BC that Solon is receiving that information that he transmits to Plato. 9,000 years before 600 BC is 11,623 years ago, if you wish to be precise. Mm-hmm. Let's say roughly 11,600 years ago. And this is one of the reasons why I take Plato's report seriously, because 11,600 years ago was one of those massive pulses of meltwater that coincided with the ending of the last ice age, just as the Younger Dryas began 12,800 years ago with an anomalous sea level rise, thoroughly documented in the work of Cesare Emiliani. Just as it began with a sea level rise, it also ended 11,600 years ago with a massive sea level rise, which is called Meltwater Pulse 1b. And when archaeologists try to get rid of this, they say, well, look, meltwater pulse 1b unfolded over a period of 600 years. So in any one year, if you do the average, it wasn't that much. But that's not how the meltwater pulse worked. There were years of massive rises in sea level. And again, this is documented in the death of corals. And there were years when not much happened. So averaging it out over 600 years is not the way to do it. We have a time in relatively recent history, prehistory, 11,600 years ago, when there was an enormous global flood. And is it a coincidence that Plato names precisely that time for the submergence of Atlantis? I don't think so. I don't think it's a coincidence at all. I think it's another reason why we should have respect for Plato, have respect to the tradition that was passed down to him through the line of Solon, and have respect for meltwater pulse 1b and its complexities over a period of about 600 years. And finally, of course, there's the fact that Göbekli Tepe, this extraordinary megalithic site in Turkey, as far as we can tell now, the work began on that site, guess when? 11,600 years ago. I can't help feeling that we're looking at a project that was initiated by survivors of that cataclysm to bring to that place skills and knowledge that had not previously existed in that place, to create a gigantic megalithic site. Indeed, partly for spiritual reasons, but also partly to mobilize the local population, to give them a big project to work on, and during that project to teach them agriculture. At the beginning, Göbekli Tepe was entirely inhabited by hunter-gatherers. 1,000 years later, they were all agriculturalists, and during those 1,000 years, the whole Göbekli Tepe was created, and then, lo and behold, once that was achieved, it was buried, deliberately buried. More work was put into burying it than was put into creating it. These stone circles were filled up with piles of rubble, and then they created a rubble hill over the top of the whole thing. And that's why Göbekli Tepe is such an important site, because it then remained sealed. Nobody was trampling all over it. No later cultures were coming in and contaminating the carbon dating with introduced materials from a later time. It's a sealed site, and it's 11,600 years old. And that coincides with meltwater pulse 1b, and that coincides with the date that Plato gives for the submergence of Atlantis. We can either choose to just say all of this is coincidence. In my case, I think it's not coincidence, and I think it's really worth looking at the implications of all of this with an open mind to see where it leads. I'm saying that there was a culture that emerged out of shamanism that developed certain skills, that was able to explore the world and almost certainly influence other cultures around the world. Dating of quite a number of megalithic sites needs to be reconsidered in the light of Göbekli Tepe. The notion before Göbekli Tepe was that the oldest megalithic site on Earth was about 6,000 years old. Suddenly we have this 11,600 years old megalithic site, and clearly the people who made it knew what they were doing. You don't move around 20-ton megaliths and carve, beautiful imagery into them and in high relief. You don't do that without having experience of what you're doing. You don't align them. Some archaeologists say, it must have been the Natufian culture, which existed in that area for 1,000 or 2,000 years before that. But what we see from the Natufian culture is just no more dramatic than a sort of dry stone wall in ways. Nothing big, nothing extraordinary like this. I am yet to see the evolutionary process that could have led to Göbekli Tepe. And if it's there, I think it's going to change our entire view of history. And it's interesting that now we have Karahan Tepe, which we also filmed at in the series, and 10 other sites have now been found in that area, which all date back to that horizon around 11 or 12,000 years ago.
Wow.
And goodness knows what is going to come out of all of those excavations. I mean, first of all, Göbekli Tepe was discovered by accident. Back in the 1950s, a team of American archaeologists who were interested in Stone Age stuff from the Paleolithic, the Upper Paleolithic, found themselves at Göbekli Tepe, and then they saw the tip of a beautifully carved pillar sticking out of the side of the hill. And they said, nah, that's not Stone Age. That's way too good. That must be Byzantine. That must be from just 1,000 years ago or so. So it's not our stuff. We're not going to excavate it. And there it was left until Klaus Schmidt, a great man of the German Archaeological Institute, who I knew personally, and who kindly showed me around Göbekli Tepe in 2013 and spent a lot of time with me. That's the kind of archaeologist I enjoy meeting, who doesn't typecast me. He knew who I was, but he certainly did, because we'd been in correspondence before. But they don't automatically shut me out, but they're willing to talk to me, and he was willing to talk to me. And it was he who took an interest in that curious pillar sticking out of the ground and decided, let's excavate here. And lo and behold, they discovered Göbekli Tepe. Now that Göbekli Tepe was discovered, then suddenly there's a reason to look more widely than Karahan Tepe. When I first went to Karahan Tepe, it was just like Göbekli Tepe had been before, just a few bits of pillar sticking out of the ground. Now it's an enormous excavated site. And as I say, at least 10 other sites in that area of the 12 tepes, as they call them, the 12 hills. Göbekli Tepe itself means pot-bellied hill in the Turkish language, and that's because that's what it looked like until it was excavated. That hill was entirely artificial, entirely man-made, designed to cover up this site. I can't help thinking time capsule, that there was an intention to preserve this site.
Knowing it would be uncovered later
Eventually,
on, potentially.
but it would be covered, but uncovered, because the problem with many archaeological sites is that they have been tramped over by so many different cultures over so many different periods of time that it's really hard to date them. Carbon dating only dates organic materials. It doesn't date stone. Those organic materials need to be in situ, in a position where they could only have been placed there at the time the megalith was put in place. And that is very rare to find. So there's a lot of speculation and guesswork goes into the dating of megalithic sites.